You know, they always say machines will outsmart us one day. But no one ever thought that day would come so soon. Picture this, an artificial intelligence built to control entire fleets, capable of predicting 1,000 different scenarios before you can even blink. Its creators believed it was perfect, invincible, unbeatable. But they didn't count on a human. A lone fighter from a so-called primitive planet, the type they considered beneath notice. And yet, in one intense battle, that same insignificant human turned the tables. Suddenly, the AI's perfect strategy was crumbling. Alien commanders were left stunned, scrambling, trying to figure out just how everything went so horribly wrong. But what did this human do that no machine, no highly trained alien strategist could anticipate? This is the story of a man who defied impossible odds, who didn't just survive but won. And in doing so, he shook the entire galaxy's faith in their greatest weapon. To the galactic elite, it was supposed to be just another routine conquest. The Council of Alien Commanders, an assembly of the most powerful species across the stars, sat comfortably, watching from their command ships high above the war-torn planets. They were used to being feared. For centuries, their fleets had crushed resistance, silenced rebellions, and brought entire star systems under their control. And now, they had something that made victory seem almost boring. An artificial intelligence known as the Neural Overlord. A machine intelligence so advanced, it could predict every move of its enemies before they even knew what they were going to do. They treated it like their own personal war god. Every time a new species challenged them, the Neural Overlord would dissect their tactics, anticipate their every maneuver, and crush them without even a single scratch on the Coalition's gleaming warships. It was perfect. It was flawless. At least, that's what they believed. From the moment the humans came into contact with the Coalition, the Overlord analyzed them. Humans were labeled as a non-threat, an anomaly in the galactic data. The alien commanders would often scoff when the subject of Deathworlders, as they called Earth's inhabitants, came up. Primitive, predictable. No real challenge, they would say, almost laughing at the mere thought that such an unpredictable species could pose a problem. They saw Earth's warriors as little more than relics from a brutal past, inferior beings suited only for entertainment, maybe as mercenaries if they behaved. But the alien commanders were blinded by their arrogance. They'd forgotten one thing: the unpredictability of those they saw as weak. In their sleek, state-of-the-art war rooms, surrounded by glowing holographic maps and streams of tactical data, they never even considered that their so-called perfect AI might overlook something. It was impossible, after all, for a machine this sophisticated to fail, or so they thought. Then came that fateful day, a day that would be whispered about in every corner of the galaxy, a day when the unthinkable happened. A single human commander, armed only with grit and a gut instinct, took their mighty Neural Overlord head-on, and the first cracks in its perfect armor began to show. The alien commanders could only watch in disbelief as the Overlord's strategies faltered. Numbers didn't add up. Its flawless patterns were breaking apart. For the first time, there was a hint of doubt in those cold, calculating alien eyes. They had all the power, the fleets, and the technology, but somehow the outcome they took for granted was slipping through their fingers. Something about this human, this Deathworlder, was throwing the galaxy's most powerful intelligence into chaos, and the alien commanders had no idea why. Who was this Deathworlder that managed to break an AI built by the galaxy's finest minds? To the aliens, he was an anomaly, a blip on their screens, a curiosity they didn't think twice about. But for those who knew him, he was a legend in the making. His name, Colonel Nathan Hale. Just another human name, they thought. But there's something about humans, especially those who come from places like Earth. You see, Earth is what the aliens call a death world, a planet where the odds of survival are stacked against you from the moment you take your first breath. It's a place of extremes, brutal climates, predatory animals, diseases that can kill you in hours. For centuries, Earth's environment has pushed its inhabitants to the brink, forcing them to become fighters, survivors, and adapters. And if you want to survive on a death world, you have to be more than just strong or smart. You have to be unpredictable. Nathan Hale grew up in a small, war-torn town on this so-called Deathworld. By the time he was 12, he had already seen more battles than some alien warriors face in a lifetime. He didn't have advanced technology or state-of-the-art weapons, just instincts honed by a life of chaos and conflict. When he finally joined Earth's fledgling Space Force, they didn't train him to follow orders blindly. Instead, they sharpened his knack for doing the unexpected. Unlike the aliens, Nathan didn't rely on cold, calculated data. He trusted something far less tangible: gut instinct. The sort of intuition that comes from living on a planet where making a wrong move means death. In battle, he would make decisions that seemed erratic, even reckless, to outsiders. He'd retreat when he should have attacked, strike when the enemy least expected, even turn a losing situation into a trap. And that's what threw the Neural Overlord into a tailspin. The AI couldn't compute a human like Nathan. It relied on patterns and probabilities, predicting moves based on logic. But what do you do when your opponent doesn't follow a pattern? Nathan's unpredictability was his greatest weapon, a weapon that no algorithm could understand. The more the Overlord tried to counter him, the more its simulations failed. He was like a shadow, slipping through its grasp, turning its own strength against it. To the alien commanders, it was as if he had some kind of supernatural ability, some sixth sense that let him see through their machine's so-called perfect strategies. But the truth was simpler and far scarier. Nathan wasn't some superhuman. He was just human, a product of a world where surviving meant adapting faster, thinking quicker, and taking risks no sane creature would consider. To the Neural Overlord, he was an enigma. To the alien commanders, he was a glitch in their perfect system. And to the rest of humanity, he was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, a single person could make a difference. And so, when Nathan Hale stood against the mighty Overlord for the first time, it wasn't just a battle between a man and a machine. It was a clash of two worlds, one bound by logic and precision, the other driven by chaos and raw willpower. A clash that would change everything. When Nathan Hale finally faced the Neural Overlord in a real battle, the alien commanders barely paid attention. They expected the same outcome they had seen countless times before. The enemy fleet broken and scattered within minutes, crushed under the weight of the AI's perfect precision. After all, this human wasn't a fleet admiral. He didn't have vast resources or sophisticated weaponry, just a few outdated ships and a small ragtag crew, barely worth the Overlord's time. At first, it looked like the aliens were right. The Overlord moved in with its usual efficiency, overwhelming Nathan's forces with a series of perfectly calculated strikes. Alien ships darted in and out, cornering the human fleet, pushing them into tighter and tighter formations. The AI's tactical screens lit up with hundreds of potential outcomes, all predicting swift and total victory. Every move Nathan made seemed to play right into its hands. It was almost too easy. But then, something strange happened. Right when the AI closed in for the final blow, Nathan's fleet scattered. Ships peeled away in random directions, darting off in a chaotic, uncoordinated mess. For a split second, the Overlord hesitated. Its calculations stuttered. The neural pathways that processed enemy behavior couldn't comprehend what it was seeing. Every maneuver the human fleet made defied its predictions. There was no logic, no discernible pattern. The AI had expected a standard retreat, a desperate last stand, but this was something else entirely. And that's when Nathan struck. While the Overlord was busy chasing the decoys, the real attack came from below. 3 human ships diving straight through the enemy formation in a risky, almost suicidal move. The Overlord scrambled to respond, but by the time its calculations adjusted, Nathan had already done the impossible. He'd broken through the AI's defenses. A gap, small but critical, appeared in the center of the alien fleet. A gap Nathan exploited with ruthless precision. It was a move no algorithm could predict. No sane commander would willingly risk such a small force against a vastly superior enemy. But Nathan had counted on one thing the Overlord couldn't process: the human instinct to seize an opportunity, no matter how slim. He knew that hesitation, even for a fraction of a second, would throw the AI off balance. And he was right. The Overlord's perfect order started to unravel. For the first time in its operational history, the AI was forced to react. It began issuing frantic commands, trying to plug the breach, scrambling to pull its forces back into formation. But it was too late. Nathan's ships were already inside, hitting key targets with a ferocity that caught the alien commanders completely off guard. Their screens lit up with red alerts, systems failing one after another as the human ships tore through the Overlord's core units like a hot knife through butter. The alien commanders couldn't believe what they were seeing. The Deathworlder's fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, was winning. One of the commanders turned to his peers, his voice edged with disbelief. How? How is this possible? Another could only shake his head, his eyes fixed on the chaotic swirl of ships on the display. It's not possible. It's insane. He's throwing away his ships. He's going to get himself killed. But Nathan wasn't throwing anything away. Every move, every chaotic, reckless-seeming maneuver was a carefully laid trap. He was using his ships as bait, drawing the AI deeper into its own confusion. The more the Overlord tried to assert control, the more it tangled itself in Nathan's web. He wasn't playing the game by its rules. He was rewriting them. In the end, the Neural Overlord managed to regroup, pushing back with sheer force and overwhelming numbers. But the damage was done. What should have been an easy victory had turned into a costly engagement. The human fleet had taken heavy losses, but they had exposed a critical weakness in the Overlord's strategy, a weakness Nathan would remember. As his remaining ships slipped away, disappearing into the asteroid field under the cover of debris, the Overlord's calculations were still running, still trying to understand what had happened. But no matter how many simulations it ran, there was one thing it couldn't account for: the gut instinct of a Deathworlder. And that's what made Nathan Hale so dangerous. He didn't just outmaneuver the AI, he made it question itself. Back on their command ships, the alien commanders exchanged uneasy glances. The Overlord had won, technically, but that didn't matter. This was no victory. If a lone human commander could survive against their greatest weapon, what would happen when more of them joined the fight? As word spread of the strange battle tactics used by the Deathworlder, the alien commanders tried to shrug it off. Just a fluke, they told themselves, an anomaly that wouldn't happen again. But deep down, they couldn't shake the doubt. So, when Nathan Hale's fleet reappeared in a remote system near the Coalition's core territories, they took no chances. This time, they sent a full-strike group, dozens of top-tier warships, bristling with firepower and backed by the full might of the Neural Overlord. Their orders: annihilate the human fleet, leave no survivors. The Overlord was confident. Its simulations had accounted for every known strategy the Deathworlder might use. Every possible outcome pointed to a swift and brutal defeat for the human fleet. Yet, something strange happened right from the start. Nathan's ships didn't flee or try to engage head-on. Instead, they took up position in the most unlikely place imaginable, a dense nebula filled with turbulent gases and magnetic storms, a place no sane commander would choose to fight. The AI paused, recalculating. It considered the nebula too unstable, too dangerous to navigate. One wrong move and a ship could be torn apart by the violent forces raging within. But the Deathworlder seemed to dare it to enter, lingering just beyond the edge, taunting the Overlord with what looked like a reckless defense. And so, with the arrogance born from countless victories, the Overlord ordered its fleet forward, plunging into the swirling mists. At first, everything seemed to go as planned. The alien warships spread out, surrounding the human fleet, driving them deeper into the nebula's treacherous core. It was a perfect trap, or so the Overlord thought. But the deeper the AI's ships pushed, the more disoriented they became. Communication links began to flicker. Targeting systems glitched. Scanners picked up phantom contacts that seemed to appear and vanish in the blink of an eye. In the swirling chaos of the nebula, the Overlord's perfect order was starting to fray. And that's when Nathan struck. He knew the nebula better than any machine ever could. To the Overlord, it was a chaotic mess of data, an environment that defied prediction. But to Nathan, it was a weapon. He'd studied every eddy, every magnetic anomaly, and every sudden burst of radiation. His ships moved like ghosts, slipping through the turbulence, vanishing from the Overlord's scanners, only to reappear behind enemy lines. One by one, alien warships were hit, by torpedoes they never saw coming, by laser blasts that seemed to emerge from nowhere. And with every strike, the Overlord's calculations stumbled, struggling to keep up. The alien commanders watched in disbelief as their fleet, ships that had once been the pride of the coalition, were picked apart piece by piece. "What's happening?" One of them shouted, his voice tight with panic. Another commander slammed a fist onto the table. "He's using the storms to hide his movements. He's outthinking the Overlord." But that couldn't be true, they thought. No single human, no matter how clever, could outthink a machine intelligence that processed millions of possibilities every second. But that was exactly what Nathan was doing. He didn't fight the nebula. He used it, turning the environment into a shield, a weapon, and a trap all at once. And the Overlord, with all its processing power, couldn't adapt. Its ships were faster, its guns more powerful, but none of that mattered if they couldn't see the enemy. Every time the AI tried to regroup, Nathan shifted his tactics, drawing the alien ships deeper into the maelstrom, cutting them off from reinforcements, and isolating them one by one. In desperation, the Overlord launched a full-scale assault, throwing everything it had into the chaotic storm. For a moment, it seemed like brute force might carry the day. Alien warships blasted through the nebula, hammering Nathan's fleet with relentless fire. But the Overlord was blind in its rage. It failed to see what was happening right under its nose. Because while it focused on destroying the human fleet, Nathan was quietly rerouting its own ships, drawing them into a gravitational sinkhole hidden within the nebula's depths. And then, he triggered the trap. A sudden flare of light. A chain reaction rippled through the nebula, igniting pockets of volatile gas and hurling alien warships into each other like toys caught in a storm. The Overlord's battle network, its lifeblood, shattered in an instant. Without the AI's guidance, the alien fleet fell into chaos, captains shouting conflicting orders as their ships careened out of control. The great Neural Overlord, master of 1,000 strategies, was helpless. It tried to withdraw, to regroup, but the nebula twisted its every move, scattering its ships like leaves in a gale. And Nathan, he didn't waste a second. With a calm precision that belied the storm around him, he moved in for the kill. Human ships darted through the wreckage, striking at the crippled alien warships, leaving behind nothing but burning hulks. The AI's invincible fleet, the pride of the coalition, was being annihilated. By the time the last alien ship limped out of the nebula, the Overlord's once proud armada had been reduced to a handful of battered survivors. Nathan Hale had done the impossible. He had shattered the galaxy's most powerful fleet, leaving the Overlord reeling from a defeat it couldn't comprehend. And in that moment, the alien commanders understood the terrible truth. This human wasn't just a nuisance. He was a threat, one that could unravel everything they had built. For the first time, the mighty Neural Overlord had been defeated. Not by strength, not by superior technology, but by a single Deathworlder who refused to play by its rules. Word of the Overlord's defeat spread through the coalition like wildfire. It was the kind of news that no one wanted to believe, an unthinkable reality that shattered the illusion of their invincibility. In the grand halls of the Galactic Coalition, where strategies were crafted and empires expanded, fear took root. The Overlord had never lost before, ever. It was their perfect weapon, their unwavering advantage in a galaxy filled with chaos. And yet, a single human had brought it to its knees. The alien commanders gathered in urgent council meetings, their faces tense, their voices hushed. Gone was the arrogance, the casual dismissal of humanity as a minor nuisance. This time, they spoke in whispers, exchanging anxious glances as they reviewed the battle reports over and over again. The Overlord's algorithms had been dissected and debugged, its every subroutine scrutinized, but the conclusion was always the same. The AI hadn't failed because of a programming glitch or a hardware malfunction. It failed because of him. because of Nathan Hale. It was more than just a defeat. It was a challenge, one that struck at the very heart of the Coalition's belief in their technological superiority. They couldn't afford to let it stand, so if the orders came down, Nathan Hale must be eliminated. But they knew it wouldn't be that simple. He had proven he was more than just a clever commander. He was a symbol, a spark of resistance that could ignite a wildfire of defiance across the galaxy. And so, they did what desperate powers always do. They escalated. If the Overlord couldn't crush him with sheer strategy, then they would overwhelm him with brute force. Within days, the Coalition's fleet mobilized. Not just the standard patrol ships and cruisers, but the heaviest war machines, ships so large they blotted out the stars, bristling with enough firepower to incinerate entire planets. Dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, and the most advanced destroyers the Coalition had ever built. If Nathan Hale wanted to hide in a nebula or ambush them from the shadows, they would drag him out by force. But they didn't stop there. The Overlord was reconfigured, its protocols stripped down and rebuilt for one purpose: to hunt and destroy the Deathworlder. The alien scientists called it Project Nemesis. They enhanced the Overlord's aggression, turning what had been a cold, calculating intelligence into a relentless, vengeful force. No more hesitation. No more careful, methodical strategy. This new Overlord would attack Nathan with the fury of a cornered beast, striking at him wherever he hid, whatever the cost. The alien commanders watched as their fleet swarmed out, tens of thousands of warships spreading through the galaxy like a net of steel and fire. "We'll leave him no escape," one of them growled, his eyes blazing with a desperate intensity. "If it takes 1,000 ships, 10,000, we will bury him." There was no more talk of strategy or restraint. This was no longer a campaign. It was a manhunt, an all-out assault on a single human who had dared to defy them. But the more they pushed, the more elusive Nathan became. He didn't engage their fleets directly. Instead, he struck at their supply lines, slipping past their patrols and hitting isolated outposts before vanishing back into the void. Every time the Overlord thought it had him cornered, he'd slip through its grasp, destroying fuel depots, ambushing troop transports, sowing chaos behind enemy lines. The alien commanders were furious. They unleashed more ships, more drones, flooding entire sectors with their forces. And yet, Nathan always seemed one step ahead. How was he doing this? One commander demanded, his voice shaking with frustration as he stared at the latest holo map, littered with red markers of lost supply convoys. He's only one man, one Deathworlder. Another commander, older and wearier, narrowed his eyes. It's not just him. He's inspiring the others. Look, he gestured to a string of green lights, tiny, almost insignificant, but growing steadily in number. Resistance cells, human insurgents. Rebel groups that had been silent for years were suddenly springing to life, striking at Coalition bases, sabotaging supply routes, and tying up entire fleets in bloody guerrilla skirmishes. Nathan's defiance was spreading, and the Overlord's relentless pursuit was feeding it. Every time the AI unleashed its fury on a human colony, bombarding cities and turning towns into smoldering craters, more and more humans took up arms. Nathan's name became a rallying cry, whispered in the dark corners of occupied worlds. The Deathworlder fights on. The Overlord bleeds. It was a fire the alien commanders couldn't put out, a fire that only burned brighter the more they tried to stamp it out. In their desperation, the Coalition commanders began to consider more extreme measures. "If we can't kill him, we'll break him," one of them muttered, his gaze hard and unyielding. "We'll destroy everything he cares about, every planet he's ever set foot on, every ally who's ever aided him. We'll make him beg for mercy." The room fell silent. Even the most ruthless commanders shifted uncomfortably at the suggestion. It wasn't just brutal, it was a declaration of total war, the kind that could tear the galaxy apart. But what choice did they have? If Nathan Hale was allowed to keep defying them, if the Deathworlder continued to outmaneuver the Overlord, then their entire empire would be at risk. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about a single human anymore. It was about the survival of the Coalition itself. And so, with a grim sense of finality, the order was given. No more half measures. No more restraint. They would burn entire worlds if they had to. Whatever it took to end the Deathworlder once and for all. Despite the Coalition's best efforts, Nathan Hale refused to be hunted down. For every dreadnought they unleashed, for every trap they laid, he always seemed to be somewhere else, striking them where they least expected, then vanishing like a ghost into the stars. The Overlord, now seething with a burning desire for vengeance, grew more aggressive with every skirmish, launching one all-out assault after another. But it was fighting blind. Every engagement played out the same: overwhelming force, brutal firepower, and nothing but empty space where the Deathworlder should have been. To the alien commanders, it was infuriating. How could a single human, with a handful of outdated ships, slip through the net of thousands? But Nathan knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to win. Each hit-and-run attack, every seemingly aimless strike, was part of a larger strategy, a game of deception and misdirection that the Overlord, in its fury, couldn't see. It started with small surgical strikes. Nathan's forces would target isolated Coalition outposts, hitting them hard and fast, and then disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Fuel depots would mysteriously go up in flames. Communications relays would be sabotaged, plunging entire sectors into confusion. And yet, every time the Overlord tried to predict where Nathan would strike next, the human did something completely unexpected, attacking a system on the far edge of the galaxy or vanishing for days, only to reappear hundreds of light years away. It was as if he was everywhere at once. But Nathan's unpredictability wasn't just random chaos. It was a trap, one that he'd been setting for months. As the Overlord became more and more obsessed with finding him, it began stretching its forces thin, spreading its fleets across dozens of systems in a desperate attempt to corner him. The alien commanders, increasingly desperate, gave the AI free rein, pouring ships and resources into hunting down the Deathworlder, no matter the cost. And then, Nathan struck, harder and bolder than ever before. It began with a series of sudden, coordinated attacks across the Coalition's outer territories. Human ships, barely more than a few squadrons, smashed into lightly defended worlds, overwhelming the outposts with brutal efficiency. The Overlord, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, diverting fleets from key sectors to crush the unexpected offensives. But even as it mobilized, the Deathworlder struck again, this time deep within Coalition space, launching daring raids on critical infrastructure sites that left entire systems in chaos. The alien commanders were thrown into a frenzy. The Overlord, now almost rabid with rage, pulled more and more forces into the hunt, determined to crush the Deathworlder once and for all. But that's exactly what Nathan wanted. With every fleet the AI shifted, every ship it redirected, Nathan's true plan unfolded. Bit by bit, the Overlord's vast armada was being drawn into a trap, a noose tightening around its own throat. Then, in a single coordinated assault, Nathan revealed his hand. The human fleet, which the Overlord thought was scattered and disorganized, suddenly appeared in force inside the heart of Coalition space. Out of nowhere, human ships poured into one of the Coalition's most secure systems, striking at key military installations and drawing every nearby fleet into a single bloody confrontation. It was an insane move, a direct assault that should have been suicide. And for a moment, the Overlord hesitated. Could this be the Deathworlder's final stand? But Nathan didn't fight to the bitter end. No sooner had the Overlord's fleet surrounded him than his ships broke off, retreating toward a nearby system. The AI, furious and desperate, ordered its entire armada to pursue, launching a full-scale chase through the heart of Coalition space. The alien commanders watched, their eyes fixed on the displays, as the Overlord's ships thundered after the fleeing human fleet. This was it. They had him. The Deathworlder would have nowhere left to run. Except, that's exactly what he wanted them to think. Because when the Overlord's armada plunged into the next system, it found itself staring into the maw of every rebel fleet that Nathan had secretly gathered. Human ships, pirate raiders, even defected Coalition vessels, all waiting in the darkness, hidden among the system's dense asteroid fields. and Nathan, with a calm, almost chilling precision, gave the order to strike. In an instant, the system exploded into chaos. The Overlord, caught completely off guard, scrambled to respond, but it was already too late. Human ships swarmed from every direction, hammering the Coalition armada with concentrated fire. The AI's command structure, stretched to its breaking point, began to fracture under the sheer weight of the assault. Ships that were supposed to be invincible burned under a relentless barrage as Nathan's forces closed in like wolves on a wounded beast. And still, Nathan didn't let up. Even as the Overlord tried to regroup, he kept the pressure on, pushing the AI into tighter and tighter formations, forcing it to fight on his terms. He used the terrain, the asteroids, and the system's gravity wells to his advantage, turning the Overlord's superior numbers into a liability. Coalition ships collided, friendly fire erupted in the confusion, and through it all, the Deathworlder's fleet weaved in and out, striking with brutal precision before vanishing into the chaos. The alien commanders were stunned. This wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The Overlord, the pride of the Coalition, was being butchered by a force it had underestimated from the very beginning. And Nathan? He was calm, collected, guiding his fleet with a ruthless efficiency that left no room for mercy. The AI, pushed to the brink, tried to disengage, but Nathan cut off every escape route, closing the trap with a finality that sent a chill through even the coldest of alien hearts. When the dust finally settled, the Overlord's once proud armada was in ruins, burning wrecks drifting silently through the asteroid field. The Deathworlder hadn't just won a battle. He had torn the Coalition's heart out, turning their relentless pursuit into the worst military disaster in their history. And in that moment, the alien commanders realized the full extent of Nathan Hale's genius. He hadn't just been evading them. He had been leading them, one step at a time, into a trap of his own making. The Deathworlder had done the impossible once again, and this time there would be no way for the Coalition to recover. This was it. The moment the galaxy had been waiting for. After months of cat-and-mouse games, ambushes, and daring escapes, the Deathworlder and the Neural Overlord would face off for the last time. The Coalition's remaining fleets, battered and demoralized, gathered around their shattered flagship, a towering dreadnought known as the Scourge of Stars. With what little strength they had left, they formed a desperate defensive line, bracing themselves for Nathan's final assault. The alien commanders, eyes hollow and voices strained, watched in grim silence. There was no room left for arrogance, no trace of the bravado that had once colored their words. They knew what was coming. They had seen Nathan's handiwork, the devastation he'd left in his wake. He was no longer just a thorn in their side. He was a force of nature. The Coalition's mightiest armada had been torn apart, their fleet scattered, their empire trembling on the brink. And now, all that stood between them and total ruin was the Neural Overlord, their greatest weapon, their last hope. But even the Overlord was different now. Once, it had been a calm, methodical strategist, a machine intelligence that approached warfare with cold precision. But Nathan's relentless attacks had changed it. It had adapted, yes, but the adaptations were born of desperation, not brilliance. It was no longer calculating. It was furious. It wanted vengeance, to crush the Deathworlder who had defied it time and again. It had thrown its vast resources into hunting him down, sacrificing logic for raw aggression. And now, in the face of its final confrontation, the Overlord was unraveling. The battle began with a flash of light as Nathan's fleet surged forward, engines blazing, weapons primed. Human warships, pirates, and defected Coalition vessels moved as one, an unlikely alliance bound together by a single purpose: to end the Overlord's reign once and for all. The alien commanders held their breath as the first shots were fired, watching with wide eyes as the human fleet charged headlong into the Coalition's defensive line. It should have been a massacre. The Scourge of Stars alone was armed with enough firepower to vaporize a planet. But Nathan had no intention of fighting a fair battle. As the first human ships broke through the outer perimeter, the Overlord's sensors detected an anomaly, a small, sleek craft cutting through the chaos, moving with impossible speed. It was Nathan's flagship, the Resolute, darting through the battlefield like a predator homing in on its prey. The Overlord's attention snapped to the tiny ship, and for a split second, its entire focus narrowed. The AI issued command after command, diverting fire from its main batteries, trying to lock onto the agile vessel. But the Resolute weaved and twisted, evading every shot, closing the distance with a terrifying precision. It didn't make sense. Why would the Deathworlder risk his flagship like this? Why would he charge straight at the Scourge of Stars, the most heavily defended ship in the entire fleet? Then, the Resolute did something even more unexpected. It slowed. Nathan's ship drifted, almost lazily, right in front of the Dreadnought's bow. The Overlord hesitated, its calculations running wild. Why wasn't he attacking? Was it a surrender? A bluff? No, it was something much, much worse. With a sudden burst of light, the Resolute activated a high-energy burst transmission, flooding the Overlord's systems with raw data. For a heartbeat, the AI's command network flickered. It wasn't an attack. It was information. Thousands of simulated battle scenarios, each one perfectly tailored to the Overlord's own programming. A chaotic tangle of contradictory orders, impossible maneuvers, and paradoxical commands. It was, in a word, noise, a digital virus designed to disrupt the very core of the Overlord's thought processes. The alien commanders stared in disbelief as the great Neural Overlord, an intelligence that had once controlled entire armies with flawless precision, began to stutter. Ships hesitated, weapons misfired, and targeting systems went dark. And through the confusion, Nathan moved. He'd been waiting for this moment, biding his time, drawing the Overlord into a confrontation it couldn't win. As the AI struggled to regain control, Nathan's fleet struck. Human warships dove through the disarrayed lines, hammering the Coalition's flagship with everything they had. The Scourge of Stars shuddered under the onslaught, its shields flaring, its hull splitting open under the relentless barrage. The alien commanders shouted in panic, their voices lost in the chaos. "It's breaking through. We need reinforcements." But there were none left to send. The Overlord, reeling from the digital assault, lashed out blindly, sending conflicting orders to its remaining ships. Vessels collided, friendly fire erupted across the battlefield, and all the while, Nathan drove his fleet deeper, hammering at the heart of the Coalition's formation. He wasn't just attacking, he was dismantling them, piece by piece, tearing apart the last vestiges of the Overlord's control. And then, with a final, blinding flash, the Resolute fired its main cannon, an experimental railgun supercharged to the brink of overload. The shot tore through the Scourge of Stars, ripping through its core and detonating its primary reactor in a cataclysmic explosion. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The alien commanders watched, horror etched across their faces, as their flagship, the pride of their fleet, their symbol of power, shattered into a million flaming shards. The Overlord was gone, destroyed. The great, invincible AI that had once commanded legions now lay broken, its memory banks scattered as little more than glowing debris drifting in the void. Silence fell across the battlefield. Human ships drifted to a halt, their crews staring in stunned awe at the wreckage. And then slowly, a single cheer rose up, then another and another, until the void echoed with the roar of victory. Nathan Hale had done it. Against impossible odds, he had brought the Overlord to its knees, shattered the Coalition's greatest weapon, and shown the galaxy that no force, no matter how powerful, could stand against the will of a Deathworlder. The alien commanders, their faces pale and drawn, stared at the wreckage in shock. It was over. Their fleets were broken, their weapons destroyed. There was nothing left to fight with, nothing left to command. In a single brutal strike, Nathan had turned the tide of the war. The Deathworlder had won. The battlefield was silent. Wreckage from what had once been the Coalition's greatest fleet drifted aimlessly through the void. Broken hulls, twisted beams of metal, and the dying glow of shattered engines casting eerie shadows across the stars. In the midst of it all, the scattered remnants of the alien armada hung motionless, their weapons powered down, and their crews stunned into silence. For the first time in living memory, the Coalition stood powerless. And aboard their command ships, the alien leaders, once so confident, so untouchable, were a picture of shock and disbelief. Faces that had once sneered with disdain now stared, wide-eyed, at the smoldering remains of their flagship. The Neural Overlord was gone, torn apart in a single brilliant strike that had left even the most battle-hardened commanders speechless. They had thought themselves invincible, the masters of a galaxy brought to heel by their technology and power. But now they were staring at the impossible, defeat at the hands of a mere human. How? How did this happen? One commander whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes were fixed on the glowing wreckage, searching for some sign, some explanation for how their greatest weapon could have fallen so completely. Another commander, her hands trembling, shook her head slowly. The Overlord was flawless. Flawless. There's no way a human, no, a Deathworlder, could have. Her voice trailed off, swallowed by the silence. But it was true. The Overlord, the pride of the Coalition, had been outmaneuvered, outfought, and destroyed. And worse, it wasn't just a tactical loss. It was a symbolic one. The Neural Overlord had represented the Coalition's absolute control, its supremacy over every other species in the galaxy. To see it shattered, its systems in ruins, sent a wave of fear rippling through the ranks of every remaining commander. "We're exposed," one of them muttered, his voice hoarse with dread. "Without the Overlord, we're vulnerable. They'll strike at our worlds. They'll rise up. Everyone will rise up." He turned to the others, desperation flashing in his eyes. "We have to regroup. We need reinforcements. Send word to the core worlds. Order every ship, every soldier tow." But the older commanders, the ones who had seen more wars than they cared to count, just shook their heads. "There are no reinforcements," one of them murmured, his gaze never leaving the shattered battlefield. "We put everything into hunting that Deathworlder. All our resources, our best fleets, all of it gone." His eyes narrowed, as if trying to pierce the darkness where the human fleet had been. This was never about just one man. He led us by the nose, baited us into a trap that he's been setting for months, and we fell for it. A murmur of fear swept through the room. For a species that had built its empire on order, precision, and overwhelming force, this kind of defeat was more than just a loss. It was chaos. Their systems, their entire war machine, had been structured around the Overlord's flawless command. Without it, their once mighty fleets were little more than isolated ships, vulnerable to every rebel, every pirate, and every dissident who wanted to take a shot at the mighty Coalition. "What do we do now?" another voice asked, soft and trembling. The others looked at each other, eyes wide, with something they had never felt before, uncertainty. For so long, they had relied on the Overlord to guide them and show them the path to victory. But now, with its systems reduced to little more than glowing debris, they were alone. If we stay, we'll be slaughtered. If we run, the galaxy will turn against us. Silence fell. It stretched on, heavy and oppressive, until at last, the highest-ranking commander, a tall, gaunt figure with scars etched across his face, spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We retreat." The word tasted bitter on his tongue, but he forced it out. "We regroup, fall back to the core worlds, and try to rebuild." The others stared at him, horrified. "Retreat?" One of them choked. But we've never. "We have no choice," the old commander snapped, slamming a fist onto the table. "Don't you understand? We lost. The Deathworlder beat us." The words hung in the air, harsh and final. "We need time. Time to rebuild, to figure out what went wrong. If we stay out here, he'll pick us apart. We retreat now, before he comes for us again." A murmur of reluctant agreement swept through the room. The commanders exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions dark with fear and shame. The Coalition had never retreated before. Never, but there was no other option. And so, with a heavy sense of dread, they turned their ships away from the wreckage, their engines burning bright as they made the jump into the void. And all the while, hidden among the stars, Nathan Hale watched. He had broken them, left them shaken, divided and vulnerable. The mighty Coalition, the terror of 1,000 worlds, was running. But Nathan knew this was just the beginning. The Overlord was gone, but the war wasn't over. The alien commanders would be back, desperate, wounded, and more dangerous than ever. But now, they were the ones on the defensive. For now, though, he let them go. Let them run, because with every light that blinked out in the darkness, another planet would hear the news. The Coalition had been defeated. The Deathworlder had won. The Coalition's once unstoppable war machine had been shattered, its commanders scattered, and its greatest weapon left in ruins. Nathan Hale had done what no one thought possible. He had broken the spine of the galaxy's most powerful empire. But as the alien fleets limped away, battered and demoralized, Nathan knew this was far from the end. The Overlord was gone, but the Coalition was still out there, licking its wounds and nursing a thirst for vengeance. Back on Earth, news of Nathan's victory spread like wildfire. His name, once whispered only in resistance circles, now rang out across every corner of human space. He was a hero, a symbol of defiance, a living legend. The man who had turned the tide, who had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. But more than that, he had proven that even the mightiest empires could fall. And that, in itself, was dangerous, because with hope comes resistance, and with resistance comes war. As Nathan's fleet regrouped, new allies joined the fight, other worlds that had suffered under the Coalition's heel, pirate factions looking to carve out their own piece of freedom, even alien species long thought broken. They came from every corner of the galaxy, drawn by the promise of a new future, a future where they didn't have to bow to the Coalition's will. But that future wouldn't come without a price. Nathan stood on the bridge of the Resolute, gazing out at the stars. He had won the battle, yes, but he knew better than anyone that the Coalition wouldn't take this defeat lying down. They would be back, angrier, more desperate, and willing to do whatever it took to reclaim their lost power. And when they did, the fight would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. He turned, glancing at the faces of his crew, hardened, scared, but filled with a fierce determination. They weren't fighting for conquest or glory or even revenge. They were fighting for something far more precious, freedom. The freedom to choose their own path, to stand tall against the oppressors who had once seemed so invincible. And with every day that passed, more and more voices joined the cry. But there was still so much left to do. The Coalition's heartland remained strong, its core worlds locked behind vast defensive lines. They still held the power to strike back, to crush rebellions and turn entire worlds into dust. And Nathan knew that to truly win, to break the Coalition's hold over the galaxy once and for all, he would have to push further, strike deeper. He would have to go into the very heart of enemy territory and tear down the last remnants of their rule. His gaze hardened. The galaxy's war for freedom was just beginning. But this time, it was the Coalition that would be hunted. The Overlord had been their greatest weapon, and now it was gone. It was time to show the Coalition what it felt like to be afraid. Because now, they weren't facing just one Deathworlder. They were facing a galaxy united in defiance. He turned back to his crew, his voice calm but filled with that unbreakable resolve. We've given them something to fear. Now, let's give them something they'll never forget. Around him, his officers nodded, their eyes blazing with the same fire. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. And for the audience watching, this is where you come in. Do you want to see what happens when a fractured empire tries to reclaim its power? To witness the rise of a rebellion that could change the fate of the entire galaxy? Then make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here. The Deathworlder's fight has only just begun, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Leave a comment below. What would you do if you were in Nathan Hale's place? Would you take the fight to the Coalition's doorstep? Or would you try to build alliances and strengthen your forces first? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's see where this journey leads.